everyone. Welcome to Weaving with Diane. This video is on creating a warp, which later on in the next video we will start putting through the reed. First job is to look at our information that we did in the previous video on the type of warp and the size and the dimensions that we needed for the warp. We need to look at that to work out what we're doing. We need an 8.5 metre long warp and it's going to be 200 threads. We have our warping frame put at a suitable height so that we're not reaching up too high or bending down too low, and we have a guide string. To create your guide string for your 8.5 metre warp, first of all you make a non-moving knot. In other words, make a loop and then pull the loop through the knot, and then that knot cannot move. That's what we want for one end. We make a non-moving knot, and then, as compared to a slip knot, and I'll go into that later, and then we have a 1 metre ruler. We start at the top of that with the top of the non-moving knot, and then we go down for 1 metre, up the other side for 2, down for 3, up the other side for 4, down for 5, up the other side for 6, down for 7, up the other side for 8, and then it's 8.5 metres. We go halfway down for the next bit. Grab a pen, big black pen preferably, and put a mark at that 8.5 area. So I've got a big black mark, should be able to see it hopefully over the front of me, at that 8.5 metre mark. String can come off the ruler, and you find your unmovable loop, hook it over the start of the warping frame. You need to have an area for doing a cross, which is 2 pegs. One way you go up, the other way you go down. So in this way I'm going to start by going up, and I'm skipping this peg because on this frame he's wobbly, so I'm going to go around here, down to there, along to the next peg. This is creating the path with this leader thread that the warp is going to go. Now, looking at this, oh, that's not bad. Here is my 8.5 metre mark. I can either make it shorter, which would make it less than 8 metres if I went to this peg, or if I make it a bit longer, I can go to that last peg. In this situation, I'm going to go to the last peg. This is where we make a slip knot so that we can tighten it on the peg. To make the slip knot, you put your fingers through the thread and turn so that the thread is crossing over itself, and then you reach, probably go from, swap your hands over to underneath, reach through and grab the thread that was actually going around the warping frame and pull it through. Now as you can see, things have fallen off a bit, that's not a problem, just hook it back up. Then you can put this slip knot over the last peg, and by doing it the way I said, you can tighten the leader thread on the warping board. You let the tail hang down, he's not a problem now. So now that we have created our pattern of the warp on the warping frame, if you have a stand for a cone, if you're using a cone, it helps to make sure that the cone doesn't fall over. Put your cone down the bottom. Here we go again. This time again we do another slip knot. Grab, twist him round, pick up the bottom, pull it through. Hook the slip knot where the other knot is. This is for doing individual warping. If you're doing a multiple threaded warping using this frame above, as you will have seen in another video I have done, you would start at this end. But for individual, in a way it doesn't matter which end, but I tend to start at the top. So we are going underneath and then over for the cross, and then we have to go around everything else. This is a long warp because I want to have lots of warp for lots of play. Down the bottom, around the peg, and then back. Now, when we get to here, we want to go the opposite way. Now, just to get around here, if you want to stop to look at things, just loop it around the peg and that will hold it steady. push these all to the back, and then you can look at it this way and see that the threads are following the leader thread. See how the threads are following the leader thread, and also see how the cross is done. When I'm going from left to right, I'm going up. When I'm going from right to left, I'm going up, but it's going from the opposite direction, and so they are crossed. This is what you need to keep the threads in order to make putting the warp on the loom much easier. Now I will continue to keep winding, and the next step we will do is when we're partly through, we'll start putting a counting thread in. When you're creating your warp, make sure you keep a steady and light tension and you're not pulling in on the pegs. Also, coming to the cross from underneath the pegs, no matter which side you're coming from. Now we will make the counting thread so that we know how many warp threads we've wound on, so we don't end up with either too little or too many warp ends. For that, I grab part of my spare string, and I should say that this string is made out of nylon. It is extremely tough and it does not stretch, and it is essential to have some sort of non-stretch, tough linen or solid cotton or nylon string for doing ties on your warp, and in this case the counting thread as well. I fold the thread in half. I go to the last peg of the warping board because that's where you don't have to count as many, and I'm counting the number of threads passing over that last peg. Scooch them apart a bit with my fingers, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, so we have our group of 10. I grab the loop, I hook it underneath, pull it up, and then I put the tail of the threads through that loop. Now, what you must be very careful of is this row of threads up here is a warp thread. This row of threads down here is a warp thread, or a warp length, you could say. So when we pass around this peg, we're actually counting 2 warp threads. So this count of 10 is actually 20 warp ends. So for our 200 threads, we actually only need to get 10 bunches of 10. This is the counting cross after a couple of bunches have been done. We can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is a final 10, that is 5. Now I've decided I'm going to split the warp and do it in 2 lots. It's not that it's too long on the pegs, it'll just make it'll make more sense later on when we're actually putting it on the loom. So this is going to be 1 warp of 100 threads, and then I'll do another warp of 100 threads, and then we'll start putting them through the reed. Okay, so I've done the counting cross, that's all fine. We get over here, we've just about finished going around. We do a final check to make sure everything is following the leader, and it is. We go under, over. Now, we get to the end peg, we want to do a slip knot again. So we go around the fingers and twist the fingers, grab the thread that is actually coming off the warping frame, pull it into a slip knot so that we can get it over that peg and it gets tightened that way. Tightened from this one, not from this one. This thread gets cut. We can trim him, he's a bit long. And then we start tying the warp. Now we need a couple of ties. First of all, we do both ends. This warping method is front to back, so it is different. We're actually going to cut both ends. Now I find I go around once and then I wrap it around again, pull it tight, and then do a reef knot. Which for everyone, reef knot, right over left, left over right. Then I get a second thread. I go through the cross. Now here is the cross here. Now I do not hook in the leader thread. I will use that for making my next warp. I go through one side of the cross, I go back out the other side of the cross, and I tie this in an overhand knot, and it's loose. Generally what I do is I push him through so that the knot's at the other end. The next step is I grab my cross holder. which is basically just a piece of timber with 2 dowel pegs sticking out, firmly put in. I stick the cross holder through the 2 sides of the cross. You can use the warp to hold it up. It can sit like that, and I get sticky tape. You must do something to fix the top of the cross, otherwise your thread will go walkies. And this is where I'll grab that, hook him up there, and that is your cross preserved. It will not, it cannot fall off. Right, we will also tie up the tail. Now, we can pull the counting thread out after I cut the tail, so we won't worry about him yet. Twice around, and then pull him tight, and then complete with a reef knot. And then the final one is a special knot. This is called the choke tie, and this is what we're going to use to tie it onto the front beam of the loom over here. Now, the length of the choke tie depends on your loom. If you measure from the front beam to the back beam, this one's 52 centimetres, that is where your choke tie goes on the warp. So we take that 52 centimetres, go up here, and I'm just going to use my thumbnail, mark it on the warping frame, and I can see where that mark is, and I'll probably transfer that with a pen in a little bit. So I get a longer tie, much longer, 2 long tails. Go around everything but the leader. Do not go around the leader. Make sure the legs are even. Find your mark, there's my mark there. Same story, go around twice. Start your reef knot. And this is where it's called a choke tie, because you really are choking the warp. You want to make sure that warp is not going anywhere. So sometimes, even though I've done that first knot, I might bring it round and do another one so that it is locked in. Later on in the warping, you'll understand why, but this is most important. Oops, granny knot. Right, okay, final steps. Now this is where a lot of traditional weavers start to panic. Get the scissors. Now, I need to swap over here, excuse my back, because I'm going to take this off, get that out of the way because I can use that counter cord again, stick that through and go cut. Counter cord should just fall out. Right, now we chain the warp. Keep the leader on. Now I find this handy if you can do this, in other words, from the side, because then you can literally just gather it up. So you make a loop, hand underneath, loop around. It's a slip knot. Grab it, pull it through. Now I find it makes it more balanced if you then swap hands. Don't ask me why, but it just does. So I pull the loop through, put the other hand through. Pull the loop through, put the other hand through. Loop, other hand. Up to the choke cord. When we get to the choke cord, pull a loop quite tight, and then you can use the choke cord to just even loosely tie around just to hold it together there. That's where you want it to stop. Then you don't have to worry if this plops around, you won't lose the cross. Grab this end, pull them off carefully. You now can undo your start and your finish slip knots. And we grab the scissors. The loop looks like it gets a bit muddled, but you can generally find it. Shove them through, cut the loop, cut any other loops. Make sure you've got them all cut, and then just lay them along so that you can cut the tails. Right. Having done that, you now have a warp with a cross, nicely held, nicely chained up, ready to go in your reed. So that'll be the subject of the next video. Bye.